Good morning. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another episode from Bridging the Leadership Gaps show, actually, not podcast. My name is Florian, and I'm so delighted to be with you today. And today I'm joined by Alena Ipanova, my teaching partner. Welcome, Alena.
Hi, Florian. Thank you for your warm welcoming. Very good to be here to discuss a very important topic today about trust in leadership, right?
Absolutely. I'm so excited. So I think this is going to be very practical. We're going to help a lot of people that are going to be watching this with some practical things. So why don't we just jump right in with the definition of the trust gap? In your view, what does that look like? When there's a trust gap?
Mhm. So if we talk specifically about the gap, the trust gap, then it's about disconnect, it's about misalignment, and disconnect about how trust you as a leader think you are earning or you are having, and what your employees are actually experiencing. So if there is a disconnect there, there is a gap, and there are consequences of that as well. So that would be a broader definition. But I think it's also interesting to, at least for me, I'm curious to hear what is trust for you? What does it mean?
Yeah, so there is if we think about trust and probably a very common framework people have heard of is the five dysfunction of a team from Patrick
Mm-hmm.
Lencioni, and he defines trust uh, in the workplace, not like I'm trusting you to kind of do your work, and I'm trusting you that if you say something you're going to do it. It's more that I'm trusting you that you have the good intentions, that you have the right intentions, and I trust you to open up to you, and I can be vulnerable with you. So I think we need to distinguish between, I'm trusting you that you're going to deliver what you said. That's one thing. But do I trust you as a person, as an individual? Can I share with you things that may be used against me, or can I be vulnerable and open with you? And that's I
Mm-hmm.
think, what we define, like, at least in my view, as trust in the workplace, right? So not necessarily that I trust you to deliver your work, but I trust you to be open with you, to share, some of my pitfalls, some of my mistakes, to be open in sharing the mistakes I make, knowing that you're not going to use that against me, right? so
So it
so
comes
in,
to the relationships.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's like almost like any other relationship, but we're talking about a workplace, right? And it's not different than other relationships. If I'm not trusting you as a friend, as a partner, I might not, fully, follow you on whatever it is that you want us to to go on. And I gave this example of a hike, right? So if you don't know how good of a hiker I am, you're not maybe gonna trust me to go on a hike if I tell you, Alena, just go on a hike with me. You don't have to worry. I have everything under control. And so this is two things. Like, once, you trust my ability to take you on a hike, and secondly is, do you trust me as a person? So even I might have the ability, but if you don't trust me as a person, you might not want to go with me on that journey. And so
Hmm.
I think the kind of the gap trust, in my view, is the gap between the trust that leaders think they have with the team and actually the trust that they have. And this usually shows up when leaders ask people to do something. So when you ask your people to follow you, to do something, to go the extra mile, that's when you realize how much trust you have or you don't have with the team. Until you
Hmm.
ask them to do something, you don't really know. You think you have more than you actually have.
Yeah, I think I will add a cultural component here because I don't completely agree with this, like that you test your trust when you ask people to do something, because sometimes it can be driven by authority in some cultures that you, even if it's not your direct responsibility, you still take on the task because it's given to you from the top and you obey to the authority. So this is the challenge that many people experience working in hierarchical structures. And unfortunately, they take it with them even when they transition to a different structure, like relocating to another country or taking a job in a different organization. So I think it's also a good thing to ask, what do you trust me to do, or with what exactly you are trusting me? could be a good question, like not a general one, but more specific one to make it more tangible. What's your view on that?
No, I agree. So that's a pitfall actually, because those top-down leaders or leaders that use authority, they actually never know how much trust they have with people. Like if people do that just because you're the boss, then you have even less transparency about how much people trust you. So I mean, it's a really good addition, because that's the pitfall. You ask people to do something or to follow you, they do it because you're the boss. It doesn't mean that they do it because they trust you. And so those leaders may have even a bigger blind spot, or the trust gap could be even bigger there, because people will not dare to kind of challenge you because you're in charge, but they don't necessarily trust you.
Yeah,
It
and
makes sense.
I'm thinking about how it all shows up when we are in a situation of uncertainty, for example, when there is reorganization or change, what kind of role trust plays there in critical moments. And I've been following one researcher on trust, actually. Her name is Rachel Botsman, and she gave the definition of trust as confident relationships with the unknown. So specifically, like she also specifies this, that it's important to ask, what do you actually trust this person to do? And I've been thinking in my own experience when I started working as an international project manager, that I would trust people based on our common goal. But then if I saw that there is an inconsistency in their behavior, then it could ruin trust. But that was also the time when I started asking questions about intention and the outcome. And having open conversation actually helped a lot to understand where we are in our expectations of trust and what does it mean. And with my practice, I found out that people rarely have such conversations. They just assume that what trust means, and yes, we trust each other, and then the trust is ruined, how to repair it, and we never discuss it openly. What does it mean? How we want it to be? What does it mean that we have trust in our team? What distrust means? What behaviors support this or that? Maybe you have something to share from your experience, any story or any example that could, bring it to a more practical point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we want to look into how this shows up, right? When there is that lack of trust, or the trust gap is present. But before we do, I agree with your experience, because it's very difficult for a team of people working together to really talk about trust, right? For some, it's a very sensitive topic. So, I mean, if I don't trust you, how am I going to say that? Like, how am I putting? In what words can I put that? Let's say even more so if it comes from someone that's been on the team for a while. Let's say we work together on a project team, let's say for 1 year, and now we're having this open conversation about trust, and then someone on the team doesn't really fully trust us. How would they say that? Alena, I don't trust you, actually. I'm gonna wonder but you've been on the team for 1 year. So what I have found when working with teams is that I try to, as we say in marketing, hide the broccoli inside the cake. So people wanted the cake, and in this situation, the cake would be kind of the results. If you imagine kind of the 5 dysfunction of a team like a pyramid, trust, lack of trust is at the base here, and at the top will be results or lack of results. So we have a symptom, which is lack of results, and then people call you and I to actually do a team building exercise, to actually work with the team to improve results, and we realize that there is a lack of trust in the team. Now, I have made a mistake to come in and say, it seems like there is a lack of trust in the team, and I had a lot of pushback because people didn't want to acknowledge that. I couldn't really prove it that you don't really trust each other. So what I have found is to do what marketers do now: give them the cake, but put the broccoli inside the cake. So because broccoli is good for them, cake is what they want. So what they needed was actually, the broccoli was building trust, but what they want was results. So what I do is usually I include activities that build trust without telling people that we're doing a trust building exercise, because of the resistance or of kind of how this will impact the way people will show up and participate, because trust it's a kind of a sensitive topic. So to that extent, I agree with you, because this is not the kind of conversation we usually have. That's why this trust gap, it's something that kind of stays with us or is present in organizations, in teams, and we don't really address it because we don't dare to talk about lack of trust when we don't, we can't really say to someone, I don't trust you. So if we think about some symptoms that we notice is, for example, when people are silent, when people don't challenge the leader or don't challenge the more vocal or the loudest voice in the team, that's a lack of trust, right? That's the trust gap. When people
Or
play politics,
possibly psychological safety as well.
which is
If it's in a team setting.
Exactly, which is the same. It's a component of, or if I trust you, I feel safe, right? I cannot have psychological safety without trust. Can I?
This is an interesting question, actually, and maybe we can differentiate what is psychological safety and what is trust, and even discuss in which context they are important. It's when I think about trust, and especially working with trust from the intercultural perspective, because now we are so globalized, and even if we work in homogeneous team in terms of the national culture, we still communicate. We have stakeholders internationally, we have partners, our employees might sit in different offices around the world. So how the world is changing, we also need to redefine the concepts that we used. And when it comes to trust, it's more spread. And I would say, from my experience, I see that it's becoming more individual. So it's more individual to individual. Can I trust you as an individual, as a person? And psychological safety, to me, is more about the environment. Is this space safe to share, to challenge, to question? And both of them are essential. But trust is built more one-on-one, I would say. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I agree it's built on one-on-one, and I agree that's how it works. However, when you put, let's say, a group of people together, and if there is one or two that I don't trust, then in my experience, the level of psychological safety that I feel in that environment kind of falls down to the lowest trust level, right? So if out of 6 people I trust only 4, but they're all together, and now we're having a debate or discussion about a topic. If I don't know exactly, if I don't trust those people, when you say trust, it's again, we have to remind people it's about, do I trust you to have the right intentions? Meaning, do I trust you that you want us as a team to succeed, that you want me to succeed, or you have a hidden agenda, right? So if we don't have that level of trust, in my experience is that probably the psychological safety level will drop at the level of the lowest trust in that environment. Then if those 2 people, let's say, get out of the meeting and we only remain with the 4, that's maybe when my level of psychological safety will go up again, and now I'm going to be able to share something that maybe I was not able to share with the others. At least that's how I see it. So they are very interconnected, but probably is going to fall back to the lowest level of trust. That's why we cannot have one without the other.
Yeah, in this sense, I would say that trust gives more stability in the team, like for the teamwork, if we talk about teams, right? And then psychological safety from this perspective, it's more about innovation, that we need the ideas to be shared, and we want to encourage that whatever risk or mistake is not going to be punished, if we get back to the to what psychological safety means. I feel that in terms of the trust and how we base it, possibly it's a good moment to differentiate how we build trust and how it can be different based on our cultural background, but also on our experience and generally our personality. So if you don't mind, I add a little bit from the cultural perspective that there are cultures, again, it's more generalized knowledge, but as individuals, we might have different preferences. But there are cultures that where trust is built on relationships. So it's relationship-based trust. And we see how it unfolds in businesses as well. That sometimes you need to spend extra time going out, have dinner, get to know each other before you move to business discussion. And in some cultures, it's more competence-based or task-based, that I trust you that you are reliable, you can do your job. You're the right person for this job, you have the competence, you have skills, no questions asked. We might not get along on a personal level, but I trust you can do your job. And I think the disruption or some of the dysfunctions start when we have a mix of those things in a team and we do not understand exactly the dynamics. It gets messed up, and then we don't know, like, can I rely on this person or not? How do I trust if we have a personal gap in our relationships? Will I go to this person for advice when it comes to the task or project? And sometimes you won't if your trust is relationship-based. So it might cause some issues at work, from what I see.
Give us some examples of cultures that are relationship-based and others that are, you said, competence-based.
I don't want to generalize. So again,
we're just going to take this with a little bit of salt and kind of try it and test it in our own environment, but give us some hints so we can actually now picture that.
Yes, people love those examples, Florin. Exactly. But again, use it as a general knowledge and something just to be mindful of, and always remember that it's not cultures that meet, but people, right? So I would give example of Sweden, which is generally society is more individualistic by history, culture, geography, and the trust is more task-based. So that I believe you're a competent person for this job, I can put whatever issues we might have on a personal level aside. And we have other cultures that are more high context in their communication, not that direct. We can say like Indian culture or Chinese culture. Again, it's very general, right? And a very practical example here that I can bring, I've been running program with a focus on Swedish culture for international talent in Sweden. And every year, it's been 3 years in a row, and every year we have the same task to do, that you need to find a career advisor, or you need to find someone who works in a role, in a position that you would like to take. And I see how some people choose who they trust to be their career advisors purely based on their shared history, like national culture, shared background, and they ask only those people for feedback. And this is also that exemplifies like, okay, how are you gonna behave when you are at work? Will you seek for advice, or will you bond and have lunch together with people with whom you have shared cultural background? Or will you mingle and create more like mixed environment? And this is what we see in academia. Lots of universities are struggling with integrating international students and local students, and we see it at workplaces as well, when people stick together with those who they know, or with those who work in their department, like these are IT people, these are designers, HR, all go separately. So we can really see how it might play out. So from this perspective, we need to be aware of like, what is it important to me? Do I build my trust on familiarity? Or am I ready to challenge myself and meet my derailers and like open up more for external perspectives? When I might feel uncomfortable, but this is also the way to growth. right?
Absolutely. So what I didn't catch is Indian and Chinese culture are
Mm,
those more relationship based, while
mm,
Sweden, for example, will be more like competence based, trust.
mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. All right. Okay. It makes a lot of sense, and that's the challenge sometimes where I see. So I work a lot in the automotive industry, and whether you want it or not, sooner or later you get to work with a Chinese company, or maybe you're owned by a Chinese company. And that's where I see a big gap where, because this is a lack of understanding of how trust is built in the different cultures. And so if you would expect, like, maybe the Chinese would expect you to build relationships, outside of work, but you are, in your approach, as a Swede, maybe you are looking to build relationship based on competence at work, and you evaluate people based on that, then there's a clash, right? So that creates a
Yeah.
trust gap, which is more or less amplified by the cultural differences.
Yeah, yeah. And in this case, it's good to ask yourself a question. Is my trust based, or in this context, for example, do I trust based on the competence? Do I trust based on the fact that, oh, we have good relationships, you're a good person, we have good connections? Does it mean that I will trust you more than somebody else to do a certain thing if I don't know exactly how good you are in terms of the, task and specific skills, but I trust you as a person? Or do I trust you because you're familiar to me, or we have shared background? So these are very, very important questions to ask, I would say, when you take decision, especially for better decision making as well.
Absolutely. And I remember we discussed this a little bit on one of our previous shows, when we discussed about the influence gap, and how to earn influence when you don't have the authority. And
Mm-hmm.
it reminds me of, I think we touch a little bit on the 5 levels of leadership, which John Maxwell kind of defined. And they start to ask the 5 levels of influence. And he kind of looks at that, you either are more task oriented. So, despite your, or outside of your culture, right, you either are more task oriented. So you probably trust people based on competence, even if you are a Swede, or actually that's how you do it. But then you have people that are more relationship oriented, so they earn influence, which also equals trust, by building relationships with people. And the questions you were mentioning are really, really important, because if people trust you because they know you, and this is my experience when I was, kind of the first leadership leap I took when I was promoted to be the team leader of the team that I was part of, then what happened is that I had the relationship with them. We had the trust. We knew each other from before, but I didn't have the competence trust, because they didn't trust me to be their leader, but they trusted me because I was their buddy, I was their colleague, their friend. And so then the question that you're asked is really, really good, because I had to understand that, well, wait a minute, they follow me because of who I am, not for what I can do for them. So I think one of the
Mm-hmm.
things that I've done unconsciously at the time was that I started to solve some problems for them. We had some issues with different test equipment, and I know those were important to them. And the way to kind of build trust and build influence was for me to take those topics and then drive them towards the leadership, and then get some resolutions for that. So without knowing, actually, because I was kind of practical and results oriented myself, then I started to bring some results, and then probably I gained
Mm-hmm.
some competence trust with them as well. But before that,
Mm-hmm.
they trusted me because I was their friend, and they knew me. They thought they knew me, not because what I could do for them. So now I think beyond kind of the culture, then if you go more into the personality and the kind of the behavior and the preferences of an individual, you could build trust, relationship based trust, even if you are a Swede, or you could actually be from another culture and still build uh, competence trust. But you have to
Mm-hmm.
know kind
Mm-hmm.
of more or less your style, and to know how do you build trust. And if you have people on your team that come from a different culture, they might have a different preference, then how do you build trust with people that want to build trust differently?
I love the example that you shared, Florin, and I have a not a concept for that, but I have a good wording for that. I think, like, trust fund. because
Trust fund.
the actions that you described, that you took some challenges and some problems and you actually made a stretch to solve them, to bring them to another level. And most probably it was not your direct responsibility to do that. So I think that when we talk about trust, one of the key elements there is consistency. Consistency in your actions, in how your words and actions align, your reliability. And if you do such things, such steps consistently, like you described, taking some issues and finding solution, which is outside of your direct responsibility. So such small steps, like micro behaviors, actually contribute to the trust fund. If to look at it from this perspective, we can all ask ourselves, okay, how are my actions today contributing to that? What can I do? Like a little bit of extra stretch, which is not too much for me, but it is actually, it means a lot for the team, or it means a lot for the management. And kind of building your trust fund could
I
be...
love that. I love that because I believe that trust is the currency of leadership. If you don't have trust, you cannot lead people. And I remember I heard this example of, when you had still have coins. Maybe in some countries we have coins, but in Sweden it's more like digital payment. So I like the idea of the fund, but in the kind of the physical illustration of that would be that you go around, in your workplace. In every time you do something that builds trust, you put some change, some coins in your pocket. And then every time you do something that undermines your trust, you kind of take those coins out. So you never run out of trust, right? You don't want to run out of change in your pocket, and you don't want to kind of empty your trust fund. So what you're sharing, it resonates with me very very well, because I see it the same way. Every time we do things that build trust, we add to kind of that fund, or that change, or whatever you want to call it, coins, points, in today's world. Whatever that is, but be mindful of and ask yourself, am I building trust, or am I undermining the trust that I already have with people? And I think that's if we would just stop and ask ourselves that question, I think it will actually help a lot of our decisions to be maybe building more trust, rather than make maybe a short-sighted decision that on the long term will undermine our trust.
Yeah. As we are speaking about trust I have this expression that I like about trust, that trust is like the air. When you have it, you don't feel it. But when you don't have it, then you feel the tension. And I would like to bring it to a very practical and more tangible, to make this topic more kind of visible. And if we discuss what are the key elements of trust, what should be there? What do you think could be there? Like from my part, I would contribute with consistency, that it should be a consistency in behavior, in positive behavior that builds trust. What else do you think can be the key elements of that?
Yeah, I agree with that, and I kind of have here in front of me a kind of 3 trust, pitfalls. So I can turn this into things that you need. So one of the things was inconsistency. So consistency, exactly. It's exactly inconsistency. Inconsistency, breaks trust, and this is because people are always watching. If your actions and your words and your behaviors match, then you build trust. Right? People might not think about that, or might not really realize it, consciously, but every time you are consistent in your behavior, you build trust. The second one was, if you have a lack of vulnerability, that will undermine your trust. So being vulnerable and being open with your mistakes, because here's what I learned, is that many times we think that people don't see our mistakes, or maybe they don't see our blind spots. So for example, if I'm really bad at following up, and if I'm really bad at details, I don't remember the details. Now I might hide that. I might think I want to portray like this image of a strong leader, and we have this wording, strong leader, but strong leader doesn't mean like, blindsided. You can be strong, but if you don't see, it is not going to help you anymore or a lot. So maybe we want to cover sometimes our blind spots, but people already see that. So if I'm not good with details, my team already knows that. And by me acknowledging it, I'm just saying, thanks God, he sees it. Okay, it was about time that he sees it, because they already see it. So if we think we have to kind of keep on a mask and put on a mask and not be vulnerable, is not going to build trust. Then there is the other aspect that I have seen, where people going to share too much, right? So sometimes leaders take this, I need to be open and vulnerable. And then if you are always kind of doubting and you're not sure, and then you say, okay, but if you're my leader and you are so, unsure, then how can you lead us anywhere? So you want to be mindful of, when you want to build trust by being vulnerable, what do you share? What's important to build trust with people? And what do you should keep private? And then there is the, what will undermine the trust is your negative response to openness. And what builds trust is your positive response to openness. What I mean by that is, for example, if you ask for feedback, or if someone challenges you, and if you then become defensive, that sends the message across the room, okay, so he's not open to hear what we have to say, so why bother? So that undermines the trust. So if you want to build trust, then you want to, if you ask for feedback, or even if you don't ask for feedback and people dare to actually give you some feedback, then what you do with that feedback, what you do with that, whatever people share with you, it will either build trust if you handle it properly, or it will undermine the trust.
I'm having this question in mind while I'm listening to you, is what you are going to do with that, right? So how this is going to contribute, or what I would like it to contribute to. And I think it can give a very good direction. Like feedback part, I think everybody understands how important it is, but still many people don't do it. We just have it in the schedules, right? Developmental conversations, or 360 evaluation, or retrospectives, but actually integrating it into regular conversations, and then asking yourself, okay, I got it now. What I want to contribute to, what I'm going to do with this, could be a very good way to handle.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be curious about that, well, that's, thanks for sharing your perspective. Tell me more about that. Or what makes you say that? And because sometimes we assume we know what people mean by what they say, and depending on the level of trust we have, the first kind of feedback could be more guarded or could be more open. And I think it's one there's kind of two things that I know we have a hard stop today, so we're gonna have to stop in about 6 minutes or so. So I want us to get to some. I have kind of two things that I know are practical and maybe could be helpful for people. So one thing that I kind of came up with, it's called kind of the trust ladder, right? So how do we build trust? What would be the different stages, right? So kind of the level one, kind of very at the very bottom would be when people will be polite, right? It's polite caution. People are cautioned. They're kind of superficially agree. And I have this example with a leader that asked for, for his team to kind of, he came with an idea. They discussed about options. He chose an option, and then he asked, does anyone has anything to say? And people kind of nodded, didn't say anything, and he took that for agreement. And of course, then after that, people kind of talk behind the scenes and behind his back about how they don't agree with that, but no one dared to challenge him. So what happened? They were like, people were polite. Then if you build some trust, then the next one is more or less like, we call that guarded collaboration. So people collaborate, they are honest in some areas, that I know these topics are safe, but other topics are off topic. So we can't really bring this up with a team or in the setup, because we know people are not open to discuss those things. Like, for example, trust itself as a topic. So you have some collaboration in some areas when it comes to projects, but when it comes to talk about people or relationships, then that's off topic. So this is more or less, people are still guarded. Then you have transparent teamwork, where it's kind of the next step. This is what Lencioni would want you to kind of achieve, where people challenge the ideas. So in this setup, best ideas win. And it's okay to disagree. And it's okay to have what we call to be healthy debate and conflict, rather than just agreement. If we all agree, then we probably kind of miss something. And the fourth one would be mutual trust, where we have that fully safe environment. And this is kind of proactive trust, and I'm able to tell you, maybe you haven't considered this, maybe you're making a mistake there, and then you trust me on that, and you don't take that as a criticism, and we can have a debate. So these will be kind of levels of trust that we can identify. And so maybe a question for our viewers would be to think about, where are they in this kind of on these 4 levels? When they think about it, the team and the setup, is that more like polite quotient? People are polite, or do they feel that they trust each other? And based on wherever they are, they can then do some other things to kind of build the trust. Does this make sense to you?
Thank you for sharing that, Florin. I'm familiar with this framework, and the other day I've been thinking about how much we are redefining now, because the workflows are shifting, and we have lots of remote workers. I work myself remotely, my husband works remotely, and we discuss these things like you are new in a team and you start working remotely. How do you build trust? And the old concepts might not always work. So you have to redefine that, and it's good to have discussions, and it's good to understand what it means exactly to you. Because from what I see, most of the disconnect happens when we have this misalignment on our expectations about what trust is. And I loved your example. I'm going to bring us to the start of the session, actually, when you shared that there are different things like cake and broccoli, right? So a very visual concept, that there are so many things that you can do to contribute to trust development, even in virtual setting, because it might be difficult to get yourself through all the levels, for example, that you named from the framework, because we might be on different pages with different people. But then when it comes to building relationships and eating broccoli and getting the cake, I think that there should be these small practices, as you mentioned. It should be integrated. And I'm thinking to give a very practical example from my experience from virtual setup. And it was one of the teams that started doing this during pandemic, when they shifted to a virtual work environment. And they would start every stand-up meeting that they have with any question that each team member, they were shifting, taking turns, that each of the team members was supposed to come up with an interesting question to discuss with the rest of the team during first 5 minutes. And all the questions were extremely different, based on different things. But what they gained out of it, they got to know each other better as persons. They got to know each other better, the environments where they worked, from home, countries, possibly something that they were the situation that they had at home, or anything that could be also useful in relationship building, and also in their work, in the dynamics, how they work together, how they address certain issues. So just thought about this example as a good way to implement as integral practice to develop trust over time.
Yeah, I like that. And it seems like it was a really good practice that helped them, build trust beyond kind of the normal topics they discussed. It reminds me of a thing that I've done just like out of need during pandemic as well. When I couldn't go out and meet people, we just had these kind of virtual lunches. There was one idea that I tried with a couple of people, and I think it would be a really good. So here is how it goes. So if you are in a setup like virtual setup, you could actually invite your team members for lunch. So you know where Alena lives, and you would say, Alena, I know you like pizza. I just order, pizza to the nearest, pizza shop that is close to you. It's going to be delivered at your door at 12. I'm going to have my lunch box here, and we're going to have a virtual lunch. And we've done these setups. I've done this, and I send to potential clients, right? I say, here is a voucher for I think it was Da Matteo coffee shop, which is just like 2 minutes away from your office. Just go down, grab something, come back to the office, and we have a virtual lunch. And a couple of people took me on that, right? Because we was in the pandemic and we couldn't have the lunch. So what would stop us to actually do something like that and have these informal, virtual coffees or virtual lunch as you would have when you would be in the office? And if people are open enough and they don't put on their virtual background, and then you can see where they work from, you can ask some question about their environment, so you get to know the person behind kind of the role. And again, this is very practical for the world we live in, and so we don't want you to use we're virtual, we actually work remotely as an excuse for not building trust. That's why we're giving these examples.
Yeah, I love this example, and well done with your experiment, inviting people for coffee and lunches.
I had a good mentor, and he suggested that that would be, and it was really, really well perceived. People say, "Oh, you're thinking differently." You're thinking differently, because then it takes a lot of intentionality to learn about a person, to know where they are based, to kind of know what they like, to kind of find a place. So, but that builds trust. That builds trust. I think it's a wrap, right? Do you have anything else you want to add, or can we kind of wrap it up here?
I believe we can wrap it up. Maybe let's share one takeaway that we want to intentionally, or to be more intentional towards our listeners, like from your side and from my side. And I think it could be a good wrap up for today. Would you like to share yours?
Yeah. So for me, it would be actually consistency. If I know you mentioned it, I stole it from you, but what I see, it's the biggest underminer, the biggest pitfall in trust is saying one thing and doing one thing. And I know we have a challenge. The challenge that we have today is to distinguish between do people know better, or do people and don't do it, or people don't know better? Because that's when we look at behavior and words, that's the question. Is this person lying, or is this person unconsciously or unaware of the mistakes they're making? And so if I get the message or the signal that this person knows better, but they're doing that because of different reasons, that undermines my trust in them. If they don't know better, okay, that's another story. How can I make them aware of their mistakes? But I think this is a question that is now more and more important for us to think about, that people have this question: do my action match my behavior? If it doesn't, then what's the message that it sent out to people?
I really love that, and it opens up for feedback as well. If you feel even like it's good to feel uncomfortable. It's a sign of growth. So even you have to feel uncomfortable, okay? So
Yes.
ask people for feedback and ask how you come across. Because I actually looked up some of the statistics, and I found out that according to HBR and Forbes, they found out that 58% of employees trust strangers more than their managers. So ask for feedback. This is a good way. But generally speaking, the takeaway from me would be to examine where your trust is, what is the basis for your trust. And there is a very good exercise that you can do. You can just write on paper names of 3 people you trust, and then unpack it. What do you trust them with exactly? Why? What make them trustworthy, in your opinion? And see, look for patterns. You will learn a lot out of this exercise, and then see what you would like to do, what kind of practical action step you can take out of this. Just getting a little bit of more self-reflection, because we know that it starts with you. But yeah, and even like in leadership, in many aspects of life. So I hope that you will do this exercise. I'm turning to our listeners and find out a little bit more about how you build trust.
Yeah. Well, that's a very useful one. I think we don't get enough reflection time. So anytime you get to reflect on how you build trust, and the people that you trust the most, how did you do that, and why, and for what reason? I think it's a really good time spent. But I hope we can actually take the time to do that, or people can take the time to do that, because now our agendas are probably the busiest that they ever been, and we have the amount of information that we're bombarded with. It's probably the most that we ever have experienced. Is only going to go up, not down. So it's about us to kind of it's on us to set boundaries and have that time. All right, I think we are already 2 minutes longer than we thought we're going to be. So well,
still good timing, Florin.
Yes,
Thank you so much for today. It was an interesting conversation.
Yes, it was my pleasure. I hope you got value out of today. You have any follow-up questions, hit us on LinkedIn. We'll be more than happy to discuss those. And if you have any question, you know where to find us. Okay. Thank you so much for joining today.
Thank
Take care.
you.
Have a good day. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.